Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Tower of Power, and I've had some requests to feature more funk music. And what better band to feature than the legendary Tower of Power? Absolute legends of funk, soul, and R&B. And Tower of Power formed in Oakland, California in 1968. They've released 21 studio albums, 6 live albums, various compilations. They're definitely, legends of funk. So even if you're not familiar with Tower Power's name or their music, you've probably heard their horn section. They're very famous and legendary for sure, and they recorded and worked with a whole bunch of people outside of Tower Power's music. So here's an image with some of the people that basically use Tower Power's horn section either on studio albums or live performances or whatever. So we've lost a lot of great musicians over the last few years, and Rocco Prestia, the famous bassist for Tower of Power, he passed away back in 2020, and I definitely noticed that in the news, in the headlines. But then the guitarist for Tower of Power, Bruce Conti, he actually passed away in 2021, and I completely missed that news. I didn't hear about that. I didn't actually even find out about that until I put this episode together and was looking up the info, and then I saw notices about his passing. I didn't know that. Bruce definitely was legendary, funk guitarist, lots of chord work and lead work and stuff. Really slick guitarist. So if you're a funk fan, you've got to check out Bruce's guitar work. The music and chord-based ideas in this episode came from 4 Tower of Power albums, and we're going to feature the original guitarist Willie Fulton and then also Bruce Conti too. So there's a good assortment of kind of early Tower of Power and then some of that glory, period like back in the 70s, the early to mid 70s. So anyway, here we go. With the opening, that's You've Got To Funkifize from the album Bump City, and it's something like this. Something like that. And it basically starts with this. And you hear the horns and the bass and the drums. Everybody's jamming right here. But you've got an A7 sharp 9, the Hendrix chord, but it's played right there. Right? On the, starting on the low E string right there. So hit that. And then we're basically moving up to this D minor 7, like that. And you could play it over here, but I like putting it right there. So it's just the low E, D, and G. You're muting that A string and you're not using the B or the high E. So it's just a 3-string or 3-note chord. But that implied D minor 7, and it's real funky. That's answered with this D9, and that's one thing definitely Bruce seemed like he did this a lot, where he would just liberally kind of move between minor 7th chords and either dominant 7th or 9th chords, so he's mixing minor and major chords, commonly in their music. So it starts D minor 7 right there, and then eventually you start hitting this D9. See, we're kind of moving chromatically D9 and then C9, C sharp 9, back to that D9 again. And then hits on, F9, F sharp 9, moving into G9. And I love that kind of hitting the higher part and then you start sliding the chord. Super funky right there. And then you start doing the same thing like in D9 right there. And then you hear this. business there. So you're doing this, so the open A, E, G, E, and then the hammering on that C to C sharp. And then you're sliding this like a little part of A7, but you're starting a half step lower and then, you know, moving into A7 like that. And then do that slide again. And then start it again. And then this is like a little part of a C sharp minor 7 flat 5. Like that. Think of that. But you're doing it like that. Kind of spelling it out like an arpeggio. And then there I just went back to that A7 sharp 9 and then hit that, you know, D minor 7 to end it. It keeps going, of course, but that's a great song. Next up's the song Share My Life. This came from the album We Came to Play, and this is a great funk guitar rhythm example. And it's really just a 2-chord progression kind of played back and forth. And you can hear this in tons of funk music. Sly and the Family Stone, Funkadelic, Prince, there's tons of stuff. Chili Peppers, of course. But something like this. So we're in the key of E, and that's flirting with a really common, kind of familiar, you know, chord progression. You can hear that in a lot of music. So we're basically moving from here to here. And you can think of this a couple different ways, but we're in the key of E. So that's going to be an E sus4 add 9 for that first chord. You know, you're holding that F sharp, that A, and that E right there. You know, so against the E, that's a E sus4 add 9. And then just move that A back to a G sharp. And now it's just E add 9, like that. You know, and you hear a lot of funk guitarists play that way, where it's just the top part of the chords. You got to think also in funk, guitar kind of takes a back seat. You know, the bass and the drums and the horns and the keys and the vocals are kind of pushing, you know, and leading the charge. And guitars are usually playing kind of a supplemental, you know, background role, playing rhythm, scratching, you know, kind of the glue that holds all of it together. Next up's the song Down to the Nightclub. This came from the album Bump City, and it has the Steve Cropper kind of Stax feel to it, like this. Like that, short and sweet. It's really cool. I love that kind of backward break near the end too. So the first part, that's actually the bass. I'm kind of mimicking the bass part because the guitar actually enters with that slide, you know, on those sixths right there, like that. And that's totally giving it that stack Steve Cropper, you know, kind of sound. And then you hear this, so you're kind of sliding right there, those double stop, and then you're hammering on that minor to major third, and we're in B flat. I forgot to mention that. B flat 7 right there. And then you got this. Then you hear the bass do that again. Do that same slide in those sixths. And then you're doing this. So you're sliding into those double stops. And then you're doing this backward rake right there, which is really cool. And you're kind of moving between that B flat and A flat after that. And it's super funky. The verse starts right there after that, but that's really cool. Next up's the song Of the Earth. This also came from the album Bump City, and this is the original guitarist, Willie Fulton, once again. And it's something like this. Kick your phasers on. There's noticeably a phaser or a univibe at play here, like this. So it's moving between a C5 and an implied G minor 7. So I'm kind of hybrid picking through this too. So that's kind of the chord chord progression happening there. C5, and then you're going to move to that right there, the top part, not the root yet, and then play the root of that G minor 7 right there, like that. And you got this little fill, and then do the first part again, that C5, the G minor 7, and then a longer fill. Something like that. And I love those syrupy, phased out guitar parts from the 70s like that. I devoted an entire episode, like the 70s phase craze. And there's another example of it there. That could be a univibe, but I'm kind of faking it with the MXR Phase 95. Next up's the song Don't Change Horses in the Middle of a Stream. This came from the album Back to Oakland, a classic Tower Power album for sure. And this is in G, real funky like this. Something like that. So it basically starts in G, and we're playing with these little partial chords and little double stops. There's part of G, there's part of a G6 sus4 implied right there, part of G7. So we're just kind of moving like that. Very common movement, especially you hear that a lot of 50s guitar stuff, but here it's funked out, in the 70s like that. Kind of doing that scratch and sniff kind of rhythm, muted strums in there. And eventually it moves to C, and you want to do the exact same thing. There's C major, a C6 sus4 implied to a C7, like that. And you do the same kind of rhythm. And go back to G. And then finally D, C, and then just end on G, and then it kind of goes back through the whole thing again. Great song. Last but not least is the eternal classic What Is Hip from the Tower Power album, their self-titled album from '73, and that was also Bruce Conti's debut with the band. And this is the change section, like this. Killer song for sure, and it starts with this hit on the Hendrix chord, that E7 sharp 9, and you're going down to that C9 right there, and then do that again, and then right there you're going to end on a B7 sharp 9 down there, like that. Scratching and sniffing on E7, and then F sharp 7. Then you have one of Tower Power's signature hits right here. Think James Brown, but this is Tower Power style. And we're in G, and we're doing this. Like that. So we're climbing up G, grabbing that B, C, C sharp to D like that, and then just bang a G7 right there, and do it again. And I love the way, like the last time, you're kind of moving up in G, and then you're going down to go back to E, and I love that change right there. It's really cool. And stuff. And all that stuff. That's a killer song. So if you love funk guitar, you have to check out What Is Hip. That's essential. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Tower of Power. Definitely a legendary band, great group, and I love funk music for sure. I've been a fan for a long, long time. Initially, my interest in music was rock and metal, and then I started to branch out and got into classical and some blues, and then as soon as I discovered funk, and started listening to James Brown and Funkadelic and Sly and the Family Stone, the Meters, and all these legendary funk artists for sure. There's so many as well. Nile Rodgers. I mean, there's tons of stuff you can find that's funk, related or directly influenced by funk music. And the 70s is where it's at. If you're a funk fan, you have to dive into the 70s and listen to all those groups. Some of them are nearly forgotten in today's world, while other ones are, celebrated and very famous and influential. So dig around. There's some great stuff to be found. Great rhythm work. Funk guitar is really addictive and fun to play, too. It's so active and lively, and you're moving around, scratching and stuff. Very fun. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.